Hi, MixRPD back with you again. So we're going to get into this 2 a.m. wake-up call song here, composition book. Go check her out on Bandcamp. Check her out everywhere she exists. Fantastic person and songwriter. Big fan. Let's give this a little play here. Great little song.
A quilt with tattered edges sewn onto the horizon, and the seams are worn.
So I just want to talk about how even just simple processing of multiple sounds together can have a powerful effect. Putting multiple sounds through the same effect, like a reverb or something like that, or even just moving a fader where it affects multiple tracks at once. And then the other concept I want to talk about is space. Space within an arrangement, space within a mix, so when to fill up space and when you need to leave more space. So in this song we have this sample here. So let's have a listen to this. Right, so it's very wide, very sort of outside the speakers is what I'd call this sound, where it's like it's so wide that it's like, it's almost to the side of the speakers, to the left and the right. And then we have our guitar bus here, which you can see I'm not doing anything to at all. I mean, I didn't even move the fader. So, and it's really, this is just one track that's playing for the most part. There's some harmonics here that hit every once in a while, but mostly it's just this track, and it's quite muddy, right? But I just left it like this because this is actually filling up a space in the track, in the low mids. And what I want to do is play the guitar bus here, the electric guitars, and the sample, and listen to how these tracks go together. So I'm going to play it a little bit before the sample comes in, so you can hear the guitar on its own, and then we can hear the guitar when the sample joins, and listen to how they sort of meld together into one sound. Right, so it almost forms like a synthesizer pad in a way. And then we have the harmonics coming in.
I can see it happen from the rocking chair on my front porch, and maybe in the past I would.
So the buses that we have here, we have a drum bus. So here we go, drums. And then we have some percussion as well. So there's a few tracks going on here. It sounds kind of funky, right?
It's been a year since you.
So we have this Casio percussion here. So it's from like a a crappy old keyboard kind of thing, right? But it's cool crappy sounds. So if we turn this processing off here, you can hear there's like a more audible kick and snare that I'm sort of cutting out. I just want sort of the high-end percussive element of it. And there's a shaker, like a normal shaker. And a tambourine that's in certain sections.
To me, 'cause he knows I'd pay any.
So this tambourine is in the chorus. And then we have this track here labeled percussion vocal. So it sounds like this. This is the funky thing, really. This and the Casio. Alright, so we have this. And then we have the sample that I showed off the top. Alright, so there's a lot of just space being filled up by random things here. One important thing to note when you're mixing is that, like, the listener doesn't know how many tracks you have. Some people, whether it's an artist, a client, or an engineer, a more amateur engineer maybe, some people sort of get obsessed with, like, you want to hear every single track. Every single, like, where is that little layer that I put there? And I mean, it's often not about that. Really, if you heard your favorite songs and you heard the entire mix and you heard all the tracks on their own, there would be stuff there that you had no idea existed within the mix, because sometimes things are just there for texture, they're there for the overall And yeah, it's not about hearing things so individually all the time. So let's have a listen to the drums and the percussion. So drums and percussion. So these tracks sort of go together. And then we have the bass, guitars, our sample, keys, and finally the synthesizers there. So some things are filling up sort of more empty space in the arrangement here, some of the sounds. And then one decision that I made, maybe a little bit by accident to be honest, but it was one of those happy accidents, was there's an acoustic guitar here, and I just ended up leaving it out altogether because I felt that there was a lot going on in the high end, and the acoustic really wasn't adding too much, and it was taking away more than it was adding, really. So it was a better decision. The high end, the treble in some of these instruments, and then some of the effects that I've added, and etc. There was so much going on in the high end, and it was very pretty. It was a very pretty overall sound, and the acoustic really was just taking away from the focus. So yeah, sometimes it's about what you don't do and what you don't use and all that stuff, the notes you don't play. And yeah, in this case, so here we can hear the acoustic. Let's bring it back.
Torture when the bells ring. Snap back to with tattered edges sewn on.
So it's lovely, and I can totally see why it was recorded, and I would have done the same. But in the end, it just became a decision to just not use it, and it was better.
Are worn.
Sort of distracting, right? You hear this like wispy sort of pick noise, and it's just not adding anything. That we want the shaker, we want the synthesizers, we want the high end from all that beautiful stuff. And beyond that, just emotionally, I think the absence of that acoustic guitar just lends like an appropriately sort of lonely element to the arrangement of the song. So I think just there's sonic reasons for that guitar not to be there, but there's also just, deeper like song meaning reasons and stuff. It just feels more appropriate as well as sounds more appropriate without it to me. But yeah, a lot of these buses, a lot of these tracks don't have any processing on them at all. You can see the keys, nothing here. All this stuff is bypassed. Faders at 0. So all of the synths have this plate reverb here, this Abbey plate. So that's one thing where that's sort of serving to glue it together and give like a pretty sort of halo around all the synths. And sort of, even just something simple like that serves to glue it together and make several sounds into one sound, which simplifies for the listener and can be a very important concept in mixing. So that's really pretty. Now let's take the plate reverb away. And bring it back. So off the beginning of the song, we have this synth riff track here, this catchy little thing. This track here. So I've added this Dimension D UAD chorus, which to me, this reminds me of Super Nintendo. This reminds me of like Mario Kart, Super Nintendo, when I was like 12 years old, and this chorus sound just helps to bring that home for me. So with
A quilt with tattered edges.
So let's hear that in the whole mix. So the chorus is in right now, and then I'm going to mute the chorus. Out. It's just one of those sound like a record effects to me. It just sounds way more like a finished record with this in there. When it's the right thing, it's the thing. The kick has a decent amount of processing on it. It's just a single kick. I didn't use any samples. I didn't add any samples or anything like that. So we got a bit of 50 hertz boost, a bit of 400 hertz cut, a bit of 10 kilohertz boost, so way up there. A little bit of transient shaping, a little bit more EQ here, boosting some 2.5-ish kilohertz. And then we have a whole kick bus here. So we have an SSL channel, and we're doing some filtering right on the bottom at 30 hertz. Because I actually did end up taking a little bit of the lower end out of this kick drum, and I wanted it to exist a little bit higher up. But first of all, we are adding some 60 hertz, and then cutting some 350, and then boosting a little bit more 250 here, a little bit of compression after the EQ. And then we have some R bass here, a little bit higher up though than I might normally do at 73 hertz. And then this bittersweet is interesting. Let's listen to this. So on. So that's doing a lot, just that plugin on its own. This is like a transient shaper sort of thing, a transient designer. But let's look at the drum bus here quickly. We have a Pultec, which you'll usually find for me, boosting 60 hertz and 10 kilohertz. And then we have an LA2A here. Just for tone, it looks like needle's not really moving. And then we have my usual Pro C2 that I'll use on the drum bus on a song like this where the drums aren't like super aggressive or whatever. The drums are pretty light here. So let's bypass all of this. So on. All right, so that's helping to glue the whole drum kit into, you know, it's several microphones, and it's helping to glue it into one sort of sound of a single drum kit, right? So let's hear that in the full mix.
I'm in search for how to get back again.
On. So just pushing the drums forward to where they should be, I think, depth-wise in the mix, right? They're a little too far back without all that stuff. And then there's also two parallel chains here on the drums. So my normal one of some tube distortion, some compression, some decapitator distortion here. What is the T? Transistor? I forget. Let me know in the comments what the T is. Is it transistor? Oh, I remember. It's triode. Triode. Pentode and triode. I'm a nerd. And then the other chain here is what I call my drum suite. So it just kind of, as the name implies, sweetens the drums rather than increasing the sustain or anything like that. It just kind of has a sweetening effect. So we can just have a little bit of a look at the bass here now. So first up, we have some multiband compression. So I'm just boosting up the low end here a little bit, just about a decibel. And then we're just doing a little bit of control here with the 3 bottom bands. And we're leaving the top one alone since there's nothing up there anyway. And then it's off to an 1176 compressor. So we're just boosting this input up here on 4-to-1, just getting a bit of volume and a bit of dynamic control out of this. So we can bypass these 2 plugins here. Let's just hear just the bass. So if I take these 2 out, let's actually go bypass all the plugins on the, and then also I should just mention now before I forget, we have a parallel chain here on the bass with just a DBX 160 doing about 10 decibels of compression here. But yeah, this bass bus here, let's just bypass all this and this EQ. So the bass gets very tiny and small. So now let's put these first plugins back on now. So the multiband, then the 1176. So really I'm just trying to juice this up through here, right? Get a little bit of compression, but mostly I'm just trying to use this as an amp, basically. See, it says here, limiting amplifier. So it's an amplifier first and a compressor second. You can think of it that way. Pretty sweet bass. So let's put all these plugins back on. Let's have a look here.
And number 2, the day that you last spoke to them and called.
So first up, we have just a little bit more EQ, boosting up a little bit of the sub bass around 30 hertz, and controlling a little bit down up here, controlling a little bit of this here, and then the sort of nasal mid-range. It was a bit spiky on this bass, I felt like. Then we have a bit of MV2, doing a bit of dynamic compression. So off. Back on. And then we're into this amp here. So this Ampeg is a classic bass amp. It's a small studio bass amp with a flip up top. And let's bypass it. So that's off. Back on. So we're getting a lot of tone out of that. Let's hear the end. Okay, so next up after the Ampeg amp here, we have an SSL channel. So we're boosting up a little bit of 53 hertz here. Boosting a bit of 800 hertz, a bit of compression, because why not? So again, we're doing a bit more 30 hertz here. And then the tube tech here, I don't often boost up the output here on the tube tech, and I often leave the attack and the release at 12 o'clock. But in this case, I'm going for faster settings, and I am actually doing a significant boost of 4.5 decibels on the output of the compressor. But I love this compressor. It's my favorite overall. It's just so musical. So let's bypass this. So off. So yeah, I love how musical this can be and how it just sounds like it's influencing the way the player is actually playing the instrument. And then we have a bit more detailed sculpting EQ here. Here we're on 12 decibels. Let's zoom in. 6 decibels, 3 decibels. Always be aware of the scale here, right? Like these look like huge moves, but look, this is only 3 decibels, right? So they're not as big as they look. And then just a bit of distortion here with Decapitator. This is interesting, actually. Let's hear this in the whole mix.
Broken bird with the sweetest song you've ever used.
So that's doing an interesting thing for me. It's actually making the bass sit into the mix a little bit rather than stick out more like you might expect from a distortion or saturation. But it's making it sit into the mix in a really nice, sort of satisfying, professional, controlled sort of way or whatever. Sounds like a record, I always say. And then on the back end of all that, just a little bit more EQ. So we're actually just doing a little bit of high pass filtering here at 60 hertz. After all that boosting up of the 30 hertz, huh? But it does make a difference still, trust me. Let's go turn off these 30 hertz boosts and see what difference we can hear. So let's listen to the bass here. Let's take off the Pultec, boosting 30 hertz. And then let's take off this boost here. So the bass definitely sounds more thin now, right? Even though we're cutting 60 hertz with the high pass filter on the end of all this, let's put these 30 hertz boosts back on now. And this one. So that's a much tighter, rounder sound for me. Much fuller sound, but controlled as well. So it doesn't have to make sense logically, it just has to make sense in the earphones, in the speakers. It just has to feel right. So that's what we're doing there. We're even cutting a bit of 50 hertz, 55 hertz here as well. And just doing a bit of shaping. So what is going on here? We're doing... This is one of these unusual moves that I do sometimes where I'm taking actually a high shelf and I'm going all the way down here to 80, 90 hertz actually, and just lifting just gently. So if I turn this off and back on, see, so we're just lifting all the higher frequencies above the bass just a little bit. So let's hear it with that off and on. So on. So just getting a little bit more definition out of the sound of the bass overall. You'd be surprised, but you do that and it sounds like there's more bass, more low end because you're hearing more of the bass guitar, right? You're hearing the bass guitar more clearly, so it sounds like there's more low end, even though you're actually boosting higher frequencies. What else is there to look at here? We got this cinematic synth, so this is coming in the choruses.
Stare.
So this big swell kind of thing. And then it sort of sustains this icy synth part through the chorus.
And he drops like an angel's wings. It feels like torture when the bells ring. Snap back to the time I'm in. Search for how to get back.
So we're doing a bit of EQ, but the interesting thing here is the Valhalla shimmer. So I like this setting. I use this setting quite a bit. I've probably shown it before. It's like a pitch up an octave and some other junk. But let's hear it. So this is just the effect.
If the devil's really speak.
So if I mute the shimmer, and then back on. Hear how there's this pretty high-end kind of halo thing that comes in the side speakers? Off. Back on. So it's really pretty. Listen to how these two buses go together as well, the synths. So we have the keys here, which is just one track actually. And then the synths we'll add, which is several tracks with a unifying reverb, right? And then the sample as well. I mean, the listener's not going to know how many tracks this is, right? Look, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's this mandolin that does an instrumental kind of part in between the chorus and the verse.
Again.
So this has all kinds of processing on it, from compression to it's going through this acoustic bus here. I like to use this on acoustic type instruments sometimes when I want to use compression, the limit setting on this, and on the fastest setting one. Also an LA3A compressor. We turn both of these off and back on. And then even another compressor. He's mad with compressors. Let's turn all of them off. And back on. So we're going for a larger than life sound here, a cinematic kind of thing, right? Just like the cinematic synth, we're trying to make this bigger than life. Have you ever heard a door close in a movie? It sounds like an earthquake is going off or something. It doesn't sound like a real door closing, right? It's got to be bigger than life. And then we have the Pultec here. Bit of 8 kilohertz. Let's bypass all these. Back on. And then just some EQ on the end of this mandolin here. And it's also got my parallel acoustic chain as well. So quite a bit of processing on there, but sounds good to me. So I want to just try playing the track, and I'm just going to start muting some of these buses here. Maybe I'll turn the whole track down a little bit just so it's not blaring loud and I can talk a little bit during it. So let's turn it down like, I don't know, 3 decibels here, just to give a little bit of room for my voice. So I'm going to take the bass out.
Names of every person that you've ever loved. Scribbled down in ballpoint pen.
Take the guitar out.
Line below 3 dates for everyone.
Percussion out.
Number 1, the day you met, and number 2, the day that you last spoke to them.
Take the keys
and
out.
Called them by their name. And number 3, last time that you
Take the
spoke
synths out
before
now.
they died. And every day they're a little closer to the same.
Take the lead vocals out. So now we're just left with the drums and the background vocals. Oh no, But we still have the sample. I forgot about the sample because that's not routing to any bus. So I took the sample out too. Oh, and now there's the drums and the mandolin. So take the acoustics out. Now we're just down to the drums. So now let's bring everything back. Bass. Percussion. Guitars. Sample. Keys. Synths. And vocals. So that's just an interesting little insight there into how things build up and how things are processed together. And yeah, hope you learned something from all this. So yeah, next time you're mixing, try to think about space and what might need to be filled, maybe where you might need to leave some space in different frequency ranges, right? The very bottom, the primary bass, the upper bass, the low mids, high mids, highs, super highs, etc., right? If you've never bust things together, group tracks together before, consider it because it's powerful. So don't sleep on that. Hope you'll be back for the next video and have a good day.